For a $3 million movie part, Joe Pesci received $30. Then Hollywood gave him the worst possible betrayal. They left him broken after stealing the role. It wasn't the worst part, though. To murder her second spouse, his ex-wife hired a hitman. Pesci was probed by the FBI as a potential suspect. At the same time, he was experiencing an identity crisis that was so bad that he was unable to identify himself. He vanished altogether for 20 years. Pesci's reaction was startling when Martin Scorsese arrived to call for the Irishman. Everything is altered by the reality of his missing years. Born in Newark on February 9, 1943, Joe Pesci grew up in a modest home filled with labor. To pay the expenses, his father, Angelo, worked at General Motors as a forklift driver and mixed beverages at night. Mary, his mother, helped out where she could by cutting hair in the community. The history of their family spanned Italy. There were roots in tin and the tiny village of Aquilonia in Campa. Before relocating to New Jersey, his grandfather Santino was originally from Valentano. At the age of 4, Santino passed away in 1947. And that early loss lingered in the background as Joe grew up in a working-class environment that was influenced by the tenacity of immigrants. He began to experience strange things even before he learned how to tie his shoes correctly. In 1947, Joe began performing on a radio show when he was just 4 years old. He already had a job, although he could hardly read. When he was 5 years old in 1948, he was performing on stages in New York City while other children played stickball in the street. His parents felt that talent should be developed at a young age, so they enrolled him in acting, music, dance, and music schools. Before long, this young boy was a full-time performer. He couldn't play in a tiny league. No leisurely weekends, no childhood exploration. It was all rehearsals, travel, and scripts. He gained abilities from it that most adults never acquire, but it also took away aspects of his early years that he would later wish he could have retained. Joe was cast as an ordinary kid on the television program Startime Kids in 1953, the year he turned 10. It featured youthful performers performing humor, dancing, singing, and music for 30 minutes. It was a great deal to appear on that show in the heyday of television. One of the most well-known pop performers of the 1950s and 1960s, Connie Francis, was another young person on the platform. By the middle of the 1950s, Joe was already well-known on television. Long before most performers ever came close to a studio, he knew how the cameras moved, how the sets operated, and how the producers spoke. Joe was surrounded by music growing up in Belleville. Frankie Valli and Tommy DeVito were among his buddies, and they were working hard in various bands, such as the Variety Trio and the Four Lovers. Talent was abundant in the community. In 1959, at the age of 16, Joe made a debut that altered music forever. Valli and DeVito were introduced to Bob Gaudio, music, a teenage songwriter and musician. The Four Seasons was born out of that encounter in 1960. Their subsequent songs include Sherry and December 1963. Nick Massey and Gaudio from the Royal Teenagers were among the people Joe knew from his early years. Joe found himself in the center of one of the nation's most vibrant centers of musical talent, his town. He spoke about that time with a mixture of hurt and honesty years later. He claimed he was born into the industry and had no other option. He expressed that he wished he could have done something more composed, something that didn't force him to express his feelings at the drop of a hat. As the other children went to the movies, Joe was learning lines. He had obligations too enormous for a child to handle while they were riding bicycles around the block. He had good intentions from his parents. Their decision influenced Joe's life before he had the chance to make his own decisions, even though they desired stability and opportunity. Joe made his cinematic debut as a dancer in Hey, Let's Twist in 1961, when he was 18 years old. It featured Joey D and the Starlighters and featured performers at the Peppermint Lounge in New York. Joe made a fleeting appearance and received no recognition. The film did not succeed either. After that, a painful event occurred. He didn't have a part for 15 years. From 1961 to 1976, nothing existed. In order to make ends meet, he followed in his mother's footsteps and continued to look for a career in entertainment. He appeared to be exercising on a Stairmaster in the movie, according to a later joke made by one of the viewers. That moment of forgetting turned into a reminder of how difficult and protracted his journey would be. However, during those same years, a crazy thing was going on in another area of his life. Joe had a good command of the guitar. During the mid-1960s, he was the lead guitarist for Joey D and the Starlighters. Even more unexpectedly, Jimi Hendrix, though not at the same time as Joe, held the exact same role with the same band in 1965. In 30 seconds, Rice had impressed Joey D. Even that fact changed the perception of Joe's skill. He was working at a level that most people were unaware of. Joe Ritchie, who was 25 at the time, recorded an album called Little Joe Sure Can Sing in 1968. 10 tracks total, 3 Beatles covers, music, and 3 songs by B.G. This jazz and pop album was oddly issued by Brunswick Records, while having a roster full of soul musicians like Jackie Wilson. The album was such a failure that copies were hard to come by for decades. It remained hidden until November 5, Music, 2021, 53 years later, when it was re-released on streaming services. Barry Gibb, one of the Bee Gees, subsequently stated that he adored Joe's versions, that Frankie Valli had even recorded one tune earlier. There was even a brief appearance of the CD in the 2021 movie The Many Saints of Newark. Pop history was altered by Joe's straightforward introduction between Gaudio and his friends in 1959 and 1960. And that old moment returned to music, him on June 11, 2006, in a great way. Joe entered the stage to introduce a Jersey Boys performance, which narrated the Four Seasons, at the 60th Tony Awards. Tommy DeVito, Bob Gaudio, and Frankie Valli were standing beside him. He made a joke about them being the actual Four Seasons rather than his security. That evening, the performance won Best Musical. Decades before, Joe's little deed had contributed to the formation of a band that sold millions of records. Today, a Broadway smash was honoring that history. However, he did something quite different for 6 arduous years prior to that recognition. After responding to a newspaper ad, Joe joined Frank Vincent's music band in 1969. Eventually, Joe and Frank transitioned into a comedic partnership as the lounge music disappeared. They blended biting insult humor with comedic timing. They joined a Broadway revue in 1975 and gave club performances from 1970 to 1976. They also recorded comedic singles, one of which featured Joe's incredibly accurate performance of Porky Pig, music. However, after all that effort, they were unable to earn enough money. The statute was repealed in 1976. Joe landed a part in the low-budget crime movie The Death Collector that same year. During a $40,000 theft, he portrayed Joe Salino, a menial enforcer who meets a cruel end. Although the picture barely made it to theaters, critics praised Joe's work. Very few people saw it. After filming, Joe relocated to Hollywood in the hopes that it would lead to a job, but not a single door opened. His sole recognized film role from 1961 until 1980 was this one. That setback shattered him. After his return to New York, he accepted a position at a restaurant. For a period, he resided in the Bronx above Amy's. According to some, he oversaw an Italian eatery in New Jersey. He didn't do anything from 1976 to 1979. He thought his work was done. After decades of performance, he was done at the age of 33. Working regular hours, he was taking orders, carrying dishes, and attempting to put the ideal he had pursued since childhood out of his mind. Then an extraordinary event occurred. Robert Dyro was watching The Death Collector on a poor television transmission one evening in 1979. He saw a glimpse of something genuine in Joe's performance. He informed Martin Scorsese that Raging Bull required this unidentified actor. They had an issue, though. No one was aware of Joe's whereabouts. So, like detectives, they searched for him and finally located him at the restaurant. Joe assumed they were kidding when they personally approached him to give him the part of Joey LaMotta. For years had passed since he left the industry. Joe was 37 when Raging Bull was released in 1980. Since he was 4 years old, he had worked. He was referred to as a newcomer, though. One of Joe's ribs shattered after Dairo shoved him so forcefully into a door during a heated argument. Despite the pain, he continued to act and completed the scene before anyone noticed. Despite its $18 million budget and $23.4 million box office receipts, the movie garnered 8 Oscar nominations, including Joe's first for Best Supporting Actor. In 1982, he was again named the most promising rookie by BAFTA. After 27 years of performing, he had his breakthrough at the age of 37. Joe worked on movies through the early 1980s, but they didn't really raise his profile. Easy Money, I'm Dancing as Fast as I Can, and Dear Mr. Wonderful all featured him. He and Dairo reunited in the 1984 film Once Upon a Time in America. He used these films to subtly improve his resume. Although the job was consistent, the spotlight had not yet arrived. In 1988, things changed once more. In Moonwalker, Michael Jackson portrayed him as the antagonist Mr. Big. Jackson had a massive $22 million budget for the movie at the time. Globally, it brought in $67 million. Joe added an odd and unforgettable chapter to his career by playing a drug-dealing underworld lord with exaggerated intensity. Then he took on a part that fans would never forget in 1989. In Lethal Weapon 2, he played Leo, Music, Gets, a chatty witness whose anxious babbling permeated every scene. His catchy beat and well-known okay statement made him a favorite among fans. Even Danny DeVito had been in the running for the role. Joe continued to play Leo in the following 2 movies, in 1992 and 1998, making that character a mainstay of the franchise. On March 25, 1991, Joe Pesci entered the 63rd Academy Awards without any expectations. He had previously told reporters that he was ready to lose since he believed the Academy was beginning to prioritize commercial decisions above purely artistic ones. The competition was fierce, yet he arrived calm and collected. Dick Tracy's Al Pacino. Andy Garcia for the 3rd installment of The Godfather. Dancing with Wolves, starring Graham Greene. Davidson, Bruce, for Longtime Companion. Everything changed in an instant, though, as they opened the envelope and shouted his name for Goodfellas' Best Supporting Actor award. The entire weight of a career that had been advanced by coercion rather than self-assurance rested on that one moment. Even after winning the Los Angeles, Boston, Chicago, and Dallas-Fort Worth Critic Awards, he still didn't believe he would win the Oscar. That could be the reason he just said 5 silent words as he took the stage. I am privileged. Much obliged. The entire room was astonished as he then moved away. That brief speech became legendary in and of itself. It was so quick that people still talk about it. Only the 1968 one-word thank you from Alfred Hitchcock was shorter. Behind the scenes. Although he never imagined winning, Pesci said that he had a lot he wanted to say but didn't prepare anything. At least you should cheer for yourself, he joked. However, he just hadn't. Strangely enough, the little speech revealed the true man. There was no noise, no pointless chatter, no performance, just a tidy exit that suited him better than any protracted emotional moment could. Nevertheless, his characters were fueled by fire that originated in actual locations. The well-known funny house scene in Goodfellas originated on a night in Pesci's early years. When he informed a customer connected to the mob that he was humorous, he was a young waiter in Queens. The client didn't interpret it correctly. Pesci recalled the event as one that might have resulted in his death because of how rapidly the stress increased. It was during Goodfellas that he shared that memory to Scorsese years later. Despite Pesci's later explanation that scenes like that require structure, people still think the entire scenario was improvised on the fly. Without planning, a movie cannot be made in its entirety. Nevertheless, the other actors' terror was genuine as they had no idea what he was about to say. Their responses brought the moment to life. The year he had was what made all of this even more amazing. When Goodfellas debuted in September 1990, its violence and speed astounded viewers. He was transformed into someone entirely different when Home Alone debuted in theaters a few weeks later on November 16, 1990. An 8-year-old outwitted a clumsy burglar. Home Alone earned more than $285 million in the US alone and remained at the top for 12 weeks in a row. It became a huge success. There was a crazy contrast. He was explosive and frightening in one movie. In the other, he collapsed downstairs while speaking in absurd gibberish. His defining year was 1990 because of that kind of range. A real person called Thomas DeSimone was standing behind Tommy DeVito. Because he constantly carried two firearms, he was referred to as Two Guns. He was associated with the Lufthansa heist and the Air France robbery, and he was employed by the Lussisi criminal family. His tale came to a terrible end. They promised to make him at last in January 1979. Rather, they enticed him into a trap. He was 28 when he disappeared that day. The same year that Goodfellas was released, in 1990, they pronounced him legally dead. Henry Hill later claimed that DeSimone died slowly and brutally at the hands of John Gotti. They never located a body. However, Pesci added to his threat by bringing something else to the screen. He was roughly 6 inches shorter than the typical American male, standing only 5 feet 3 inches. It enhanced the unpredictability of his personalities rather than limiting them. People weren't prepared for someone so tiny to be so angry. When he acted alongside tall co-stars like Ray Liotta at 6 feet and Robert De Niro at 5 feet 10 inches, that surprise became part of his signature. His 1990 Oscar victory demonstrated that when talent was overwhelming, height was meaningless. With Oliver Stone's JFK, which was released on December 20, 1991, he then entered a whole new realm. David Ferrie, a real guy associated with Kennedy assassination theories, was performed musically by Peasy. He walked tensely and nervously, his eyes darting about as if he were observing shadows, and he wore an odd wig. In one passionate moment, he was chain-smoking Lucky cigarettes and shouting that he was dead. It lacked Tommy DeVito's wildness, loudness, and terror. One of the most unforgettable paranoid episodes in contemporary cinema, according to critics. At about the same time, he was followed for years by another story. In 1990, while working on Home Alone, he bit 10-year-old Macaulay Culkin's finger so forcefully that it was scarred. During a Q&A in Rosemont in November 2025, Culkin discussed it. He claimed that Pesci was attempting to frighten him in order to make the action seem authentic, but he bit too forcefully. A tiny indentation remains on Culkin's finger. And he recalled the expression on Pesci's face afterwards. A momentary anxiety that pierced the tough guy exterior. Then, on March 13, 1992, came My Cousin Vinny. The movie made over $64 million globally despite costing $11 million. Pesci portrayed Vincent LaGuardia Gambini, a boisterous attorney from New York who gets involved in a rural Alabama murder case. The movie made $7.4 million at its 1,227 theater debut and continued to do well for weeks. Pesci's heavy accent made it impossible for the English director to grasp the word youths when she said yeah. In the script, they preserved that moment. For her performance, Marika To received an Oscar, and Pesci won the 1993 American Comedy Award for Funniest Actor. After it, he had one of his most successful years. He released 3 significant films in 1992. On May 15, Lethal Weapon 3 was released, and during its first weekend, it made $33.2 million. It became the most popular movie in the series, grossing $320 million worldwide. On October 16, the public's attention was drawn. It only made $3.1 million out of a budget of $15 million. Then, on November 20, Home Alone 2 premiered in 2222 theaters with 31.1 million tickets, setting a new record for November. The global total was $359 million. In less than a year, 3 movies, 3 genres, and 1 actor demonstrating his versatility. For Casino, he went back to Scorsese in 1995. The movie had its national premiere on November 22 after having its New York premiere on November 14. $52 million was the budget. It debuted in 100 Sun and 16 cinemas with 9.9 million patrons. As Nicky Santoro, Pesci portrayed Anthony Spalatro, a real mob enforcer. Though colder in a way that increased the sense of danger, the character was violent and unpredictable, much like Tommy DeVito. Pesci was nominated for Best Villain at the 1996 MTV Music Movie Awards for his performance. The fact that he could still inhabit a role like that and make the entire screen appear smaller simply by standing in it served as a reminder to everyone, regardless of how many comedies he performed. Joe Pesci entered an odd maelstrom that he had never anticipated in 1997. In search of something lighter after years of playing serious parts, he attempted to transition into comedy. The adjustment, however, struck him hard. Eight Heads arrived in a duffel bag on April 18, 1997. In its first music weekend, it only made $2 million after squeezing into theaters from 1,553 screens. It only earned $3.6 million by the end of its run. It was destroyed by critics. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a score of 7%. Even worse, Metacritic gave it a score of 15 out of 100. The entire situation seemed like a joke that no one found funny. Then it worsened. Despite having a large $53 million budget when it debuted on May 30, 1997, Gone Fishing only made $19.7 million worldwide. Despite starting with $5.8 million, it was defeated by The Lost World. On December 19, 1995, stuntwoman Janet Wilder was killed during a speedboat sequence, while her husband Scott and father-in-law Glenn were hurt. This tragedy was the set's own. Long after the movie was released, that suffering persisted. Additionally, Pesci's reputation as a bankable star was severely damaged by the time both films faded. The next year, he gave it another go with a familiar attempt. He reappeared as Leo in Lethal Weapon 4 in July 1998. Despite the movie's success, he received a RZZY nomination for Worst Supporting Actor at the 1999 Golden Raspberry Awards for his performance. It ached. 8 years prior, in 1990, he had won Best Supporting Actor for Goodfellas at the Oscars. According to The Washington Post, the film had a violent and foolish delicacy, with a high level of action and a low level of comedy. It was a peculiar way to finish. That movie turned out to be his final theatrical performance before he left Hollywood, leaving behind a nomination that seemed like a cruel farewell. Pesci entered an even more chaotic situation a few years later. In Gotti, In the Shadow of My Father, he had been verbally assured of the part of Angelo Riero. He was to receive $3 million from the arrangement. Pesci gave it his all because Ruggiero was known for being hefty. In order to fit in, he gave up his strict diet and put on about 30 pounds. Then it all fell apart. According to reports, the producers withdrew their offer, giving him a smaller part as Anthony Casto for just $1 million as opposed to $3 million. They said that Pesci had left months earlier in order to wait for Nick Feats, the director, to be removed. That was untrue, according to his attorney, who maintained that the filmmakers never meant to uphold their contract. Pesci filed a complaint in Los Angeles Superior Court, Music, on July 28, 2011, seeking $3 million in damages. He described how, even after the contract started to fall apart, he stayed ready by preparing for the role and gaining the necessary weight. The case went on for over 2 years. Both parties reached a confidential settlement in early February 2013, bringing a peaceful conclusion. No one disclosed the terms. The Gotti movie was never made during this entire period. As if no one wanted to touch it again, it remained trapped in development. Pesci had led an even more secretive life when he was younger, years prior to all of this. At the age of 21, he was married for the first time in January 1964. About 18 or 19 was his bride's age. Her name is unfamiliar. No pictures ever turned up. Around 1967, they gave birth to a daughter. That marriage ended amicably, and Pesci never mentioned it again. It was buried behind decades of quiet and turned into a secret chapter. He was married again in 1988. It was 21-year-old actress and model Claudia Harrow this time. He was 45 years old. Up until 1992, they remained married and had a daughter named Tiffany. Harrow developed a modest acting career, making honorable appearances in movies like New Nightmare. She even got a part in Casino thanks to Pesci's efforts. It took 22 takes to complete that one scene. Although they separated in 1992, they continued to work together for a few years. In 1998, Harrow remarried stuntman Garrett Warren. Only a year later, that marriage was dissolved. Then one of the gloomiest nights in Pesci's life arrived. A man repeatedly rang the doorbell at Warren's Westlake Village residence on May 20, 2000. The man produced and discharged a .32 caliber handgun when Warren opened it. 4 bullets struck Warren's chest, neck, hip, and eye despite his best efforts to duck and twist. He lost his right eye, but he lived despite falling to the ground. The gunman missed his mother as she rushed at him. Police suspected Claudia Harrow right first. They thought she had planned a $10,000 hit on her former spouse. But it didn't stop there. Harrow attempted to hire a different hitman when Warren survived. At one point, the original shooter said he was sorry and that he could finish it if necessary, but he was not a good shot. Calmly, Harrow inquired as to whether there would be a warranty in case the work wasn't done correctly. When Miguel Crow was stopped by police and documents including Warren's picture and daily schedule were discovered in his trunk, the scheme finally fell apart. Investigators followed the trail to Manuel Harrow, Claudia's brother, and then to Jorge Hernandez. Claudia was taken into custody and accused with attempted murder in December 2005, 5 years later. Before entering a no-contest plea in April 2012, she was freed on $1.25 million to $25 million bail. 12 years and 4 months was her sentence. In August 2019, she was released after completing her sentence. Unusual events occurred at her sentence in April 2012. Joe Pesci showed up in black and sat next to a white nun. Everyone was drawn in by the contrast. When Harrow was led away, he appeared devastated. Authorities had previously looked into him when a witness said he might have paid for the hit, but they ultimately found him not guilty. Both of them didn't want the courtroom scene to feel like the conclusion of a lengthy tale. Pesci started seeing Angie Everhart, a supermodel, shortly after the Warren shooting. His age was 57. She was early in her 30s. They spent 8 years together. He made the proposal in 2007. They had a future together, but in April 2008, 9 months later, they split up. According to friends, he continued to love her even after the breakup. He was later briefly spotted with Joey House. Even though one of her subsequent relationships ended in violence, Everhart also moved on. Pesci appeared to be over romance at that point. He never got into another committed partnership. Pesci discovered tranquility on golf courses, away from the studio and movie settings. He shared the stage alongside Dennis Hopper, Jim Lampley, and Jack Nicholson. He stated that his handicap was about 16 in a Letterman interview from 1994. It's very amazing for someone who takes their game seriously. Dyro claimed he could not imagine Pesci playing golf and would always giggle when he saw his golf clubs. Pesci adored it, though. And Nicholson did. Later, comedian Jim Breuer told a story about witnessing Pesci and Nicholson quarreling on the course, demonstrating how humorous and passionate they were together. Pesci was able to just be Joe when playing golf. However, golf also delivered something unexpected: music. Pesci felt something slip inside of him as he gazed at the ball on a calm day. He later admitted that he had no idea who was going to swing at the Baltimore Sun. Who got it, Leo, Tommy, David Ferry, Harry, or himself? He had been acting like different people for so long that he had forgotten who he truly was. He told the New York Times that he had no choice but to grow up in the industry and wishes he had gone for something more peaceful. He was tired of being served pizza pie jokes on dumb Italian rolls by the late 1990s. His desire was to leave. In the 20 years following his retirement in 1999, he only produced 2 pictures. He performed The Good Shepherd in 2006 as a favor for Dyro. In 2010, the other was Love Ranch. Like tiny hints that he had not entirely disappeared, both were echoes of his previous work. They entered and exited Hollywood in silence, then vanished once more. A project that nobody anticipated then emerged. Martin Scorsese: I read I Heard You Paint Houses and began working on The Irishman in 2007. For Russell Bufalino, Pesci sprang to mind right away. However, Pesci was no longer active. Hollywood had really burnt him, particularly with the Gotti case. His enthusiasm, music, for acting had faded, and he did not want to be let down again. When Scorsese asked, he repeatedly refused. From 2015 to 2017, Scorsese and Dyro made almost 50 requests. Every time Pesci responded, he gave the same direct response: "Go yourself." Everyone near the movie echoed the line since it demonstrated how stern he was. He was unwilling to go back. He didn't want to return to a location that had exhausted him. Even after agreeing, Scorsese quipped that Pesci still didn't want to be on site. Years were needed to shape the project. It went through several studios, including Paramount, but they all rejected it because of the ding technology, which would have caused the budget to skyrocket. When Netflix Music eventually intervened, Scorsese was granted total autonomy. Something that no conventional studio was prepared to do. Freedom was important. It gave the impression that the movie was secure and wouldn't collapse like Gotti. Robert Dyro was what really cracked Pesci's wall. Beginning in 1976, when Dyro saw Pesci in The Death Collector and persuaded Scorsese to put him in Raging Bull, their friendship dates back 40 years. His career was begun by that one choice. And now, decades later, Dyro continued to gently press, reminding him of their relationship. Slowly, Pesci stopped dismissing it and started to consider whether this was the final time they would collaborate. After hesitating for years, Pesci eventually accepted in July 2017. Later in the year, filming started. In 2018, fans were relieved to see the first pictures of him as Russell Bufalino. And the world witnessed something unique when the film came out. He kept things low and boiling while playing Bufalino with quiet power. It was hailed as the most reflective performance of his life by critics. He received one of the 10 Academy Award nods for the film, for Best Supporting Actor, at the 2020 Oscars.